So between Trump's madness and Europe's subservience, it's really an extraordinarily depressing scene. I was at the UN Security Council last week uh, after Israel and the US attacked Iran. And there were the I'm sorry, not the German, the European ambassadors, excuse me, at the UN Security Council, one after another, on the day that the US and Iran, on the day that the US and Israel had attacked Iran, all of them berating Iran, most of them not mentioning the Israel US attack on Iran. Uh, you can't even believe, Glenn, how surrealistic it is. I was especially perturbed and bemused by the Danish ambassador. Uh, Denmark is a country that will be invaded by the United States sometime soon, with very, very high likelihood. The U.S. will declare that Greenland is America's because of national security. Watch that space. That is basically underway right now. So you might think that Denmark would have some notion that international law might be important, because someday they're going to come crying to the world. Look how unfair uh, Emperor Donald is to us. He's taking away our territory. But there was the Danish ambassador, uh, full out, fulminating against Iran without mentioning the war that Israel and the United States had started against Iran. I went up to her afterwards to exchange my concern about this, but she looked at me and turned around and walked away. They don't want to engage. They don't want to have a discussion. Um, but the pathetic nature of this is really something sad for Europe, to simply, completely fall into line with American and Israeli madness is something that you would not have thought of Schumann or Monet or the other architects of Europe, people who knew what World War II had meant and who aimed to stop a World War III. They would have behaved differently, as would generations of leaders in Europe. Uh, Again, whether it was Willy Brandt or Helmut Kohl or de Gaulle or Mitterrand, you would have had a completely different idea. A Europe that's Europe, that is the heir of thousands of years of civilization, that knows something or two, that has seen war and wants peace. But this is not at all what we see. We have van der Leyen, we have Merz. You just can't make this up right now, how this project has collapsed. And that's why we're in the early days of World War III, because nobody has sense right now to say to Emperor Donald that this is not a good idea.
You just heard Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, economist, Columbia professor, and one of the few voices in the Western elite willing to speak truth, deliver a shocking reality. Europe has completely lost any identity and any sense. And he didn't stop there. He described a surreal scene at the UN Security Council, where European ambassadors berated Iran for being attacked, while ignoring the U.S.-Israeli bombing that started the war. He called out Denmark, a nation soon to face U.S. territorial demands over Greenland, for condemning Iran without mentioning the attack. He exposed Germany's collapse, from the statesmanship of Adenauer and Schmidt to the military posturing of Merz. And he made a chilling declaration: we're in the early days of World War III, because nobody has the sense to tell Emperor Donald this is a bad idea. Let's unpack what Sachs said, and why this moment reveals the complete death of European sovereignty. Sachs begins with a scene most Western media ignores. After the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, European ambassadors stood at the UN Security Council and condemned Iran. Not the attackers, not the aggressors, not the nations that bombed Iranian sites days before scheduled peace talks, but Iran. As Sachs says, most of them not mentioning the Israel-U.S. attack on Iran. That's not diplomacy. That's collaboration with aggression. And it's not just passive silence. It's active blame shifting, accusing the victim of provoking its own attack. This is the same pattern we saw with Ukraine, blaming Russia for NATO expansion. With Gaza, blaming Hamas for Israel's blockade. With Venezuela, blaming Maduro for U.S. sanctions. The West has perfected the art of provoking conflict, launching aggression, blaming the victim. And Europe? It's not just going along. It's leading the chorus. Then Sachs drops a stunning example. The Danish ambassador was full-out fulminating against Iran, while Denmark itself faces U.S. territorial demands over Greenland. As Sachs warns, Denmark is a country that will be invaded by the United States sometime soon with very high likelihood. Why? Because Trump has already said, "I want Greenland," and he doesn't rule out any options. So here's the irony. Denmark ignores international law when the U.S. attacks Iran, but will desperately need international law when the U.S. attacks Denmark. Sachs tried to speak with the Danish ambassador about this hypocrisy. Her response? She looked at me and turned around and walked away. That's not just rudeness. That's the death of diplomacy. Because real leaders engage with criticism. They debate. They reflect. But today's European elites? They walk away from truth. They refuse to discuss. They pretend the abyss isn't there. Sachs then exposes Europe's core failure. Germany, the engine of European integration, has completely collapsed. He contrasts today's leaders with giants of the past. Konrad Adenauer, who rebuilt Germany after World War II. Helmut Schmidt, who balanced U.S. ties with European interests. Helmut Kohl, who championed European unity. Gerhard Schroeder, who opposed the Iraq War. Today, Olaf Scholz is simply the weakest chancellor, a complete non-entity. Friedrich Merz is belligerent, ignorant, a mix of fawning to the U.S. on one hand and warmongering on the other. And worst of all, Merz has never called Putin, despite Germany's vital relationship with Russia. As Sachs says, on the first day, he should have picked up the phone and called Putin to begin discussing this vital relationship to head off disaster. But he didn't, because today's German leadership doesn't care about European security, energy stability, historical lessons, or even Germany's own interests. They care about pleasing Washington, and that's why Europe is failing. Sachs delivers the ultimate verdict. The European Union project is falling to pieces as a vassal of the United States. That's not exaggeration. That's reality. Because the EU was founded on a clear vision. After World War II, European leaders like Schuman and Monnet built integration to prevent another world war. They understood centuries of European devastation. They aimed for peace through cooperation. Today, Ursula von der Leyen calls the Ukrainian army the first European army. Friedrich Merz pushes Germany toward militarism. European leaders follow U.S. sanctions that destroy their own economies. Sachs doesn't hold back. You would have had a completely different idea. A Europe that's the heir of thousands of years of civilization, that knows something or two, that has seen war and wants peace. But that Europe is gone. What remains? A U.S. vassal state, enforcing American policy while its people suffer. Sachs ends with a chilling warning. We're in the early days of World War III. Because nobody has the sense to tell Emperor Donald this is not a good idea. And he's right, because when the U.S. bombs Iran during peace talks, Europe applauds the aggression, no nation defends international law, and leaders refuse to engage with critics. You're not preventing war. You're accelerating it. And the most terrifying part? There's no one left to stop it. Where are the European statesmen? Gone. replaced by bureaucrats who serve Washington? Where are the voices for peace? Silenced, labeled pro-Russian or Putin apologists. Where is the leadership that prevented World War II? Dead, forgotten, and now we're sleepwalking toward catastrophe with no one willing to say, this is madness. In conclusion, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real state of Europe today. Not a global power, not a peace broker, not a defender of sovereignty, but a vassal state stripped of dignity, voice, and strategy. The European project wasn't built to serve U.S. interests. It was built to prevent world wars. And today, it's doing the opposite. It's not leading. It's not negotiating. It's not even thinking. It's just obeying. And until that changes, the world will keep moving toward disaster. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
The Iranians know that the Emiratis and the Saudis have played a duplicitous game, that they have tried to play both sides to the middle, as we say. So I don't think the Iranians regret any of that, and I think they want to make the world feel pain because they are feeling acute pain. So that's not surprising in the least. As far as the Europeans are concerned, they've known from the very beginning Iran presents no threat. You know, that was laughable when we insisted on this installation in Romania, this anti-ballistic missile installation, on the grounds that we were protecting our European allies from Iranian missile attack. Nobody believed in that. That's nonsense. As far as the Europeans intervening to do anything, I think the British have sent their F-22s. Whether or not they've done anything, I don't know. Now, I know that their bases on Cyprus have been struck, and I assume probably put out of action. So I don't know what to make of European intervention. I think that's more hot air, but we'll see. They could certainly send some ships, but then again, they would be in harm's way. And it all depends on whether or not the European peoples are going to sign on for this. Again, you've got to distinguish Iran and the Shia from the vast majority of Muslims who are Sunni, and Arabs and Turks. And I think the Europeans are a little more sophisticated than the Americans. They do not mix them up. They understand Iran is different, and Iran's interests are different. And Iran, as a civilizational state, Persia, is an entirely different animal from the rest of these post-World War I artificial constructs.